Hi, everybody.
Nice.
Give people a few more minutes. How do you like it up there in Westchester? It's God's country, man. It's very beautiful.
It's nice. Yeah, really nice. Uh, Wish it wasn't so expensive, but it's a nice place to live. Good
Wait,
schools.
what are you gonna do about that, right?
So, yeah, right. Uh, yeah, no, I grew up in Boston, so sometimes it's tough from a sports perspective, being a Boston sports fan in New York, but um, I've lived with it for 25 years, so
It's so funny. That rivalry cracks me up. Hi, everybody who's joining. Hi, Sam. Hi, Shawnee. Can you see the people that are piling in here?
I see. I see some names.
For
Yeah, I
people
had
that
some
don't
trouble
don't know either
with
one of us,
the
so I beg your
with
pardon.
the tile. I didn't get a chance to.
For people that don't know us, why don't you
No, I was just saying that the tile that you sent me, for some reason I we got a bad delay here, Paul. Sorry.
yeah, your internet connection might be a little funky.
Let me see if I
Yeah,
can kill a few things and then
definitely a little funky.
yeah. Let me kill some apps and then hopefully that'll be better. Any better?
Sound seems better, yeah.
Let me kill a few
It's
more.
funny how much of our time these days we spend online on these sorts of
Maybe
things
that'll
and
help.
how poor it is. Why don't you start, Bob, by giving
All right,
people
I
the
killed a bunch of apps and Windows, so hopefully that's helpful.
why don't you give people the 2 or 3 minute version of you? I know you and I swim in similar waters, but I don't want to presume too much. Uh, what could you say to the folks that are here about yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Paul. My name is Bob Pulver, and I have a podcast and advisory practice called Elevate Your AIQ. I spent most of my career in large enterprise doing transformation and innovation work. So I spent 22 years at IBM doing a lot of different jobs over the course of that tenure. Everything from process transformation to what we would now call product management, market intelligence, consulting, um, systems engineering, all kinds of things. And then spent about 3.5 years at NBC Universal in the global CIO's office doing portfolio modernization, cloud migration, uh, automation strategy, I think, which was very relevant to some of the work I do now in terms of human centric AI readiness, responsible AI, but all basically future of work related things for the last 25 plus years.
Yeah, and it's an exciting um, exciting space that we're in. There's some overlap there. In theory, my thought is that this should be the golden era for people who specialize in the workforce side of technology adoption, change, leadership, culture, upskilling. In fact, uh, it's not the case for at least two reasons. One reason is I went to a tech conference in Las Vegas that had 13,000 attendees and maybe 500 or 600 vendor startup type guys, all the way up to IBM and Cisco, and all the way down to we started it last week in my mom's garage. Um, and it was really fun. But what was notable it was one of these conferences where there are 5 or 6 talks going on at one time for 3 days. So I don't know. 5 times 6 plus 30 times 3 days, 100 talks, let's say. Not a single one was on the human side of AI. Not one single one had anywhere in the title leadership change, organization development, workforce settings, scouts, talent, upskilling. And interesting also, from my point of view as an AI ethicist, retired AI ethicist, is not a single talk on AI in society, a single talk on AI in education, AI in politics, AI in the arts, AI in copyright infringement, AI in the law, AI in geopolitics. Not a single talk. So this is, I think, a failure mode that you spent a lot of time in engineering as well as on the human side of things. This is a failure mode that's existed since 35 years ago, at the beginning of my career. It's that people that carry on as if this stuff doesn't exist. And you read some McKinsey report that says, oh, 75% of the ROI comes from, the human side of adoption and workforce transformation. You completely ignore it. I mean, everybody says that. It's completely ignored. What are your views on that?
Well, I've had similar observations over the last, 3 or 4 years, starting from when I got into like what we call responsible AI, right? Like no one, it's like they were letting the marketers, drive the conversation, and that bled into the people who were selecting the speakers for some of these conferences. I mean, I could count on one hand, um, you know, how many people were actually talking about, AI governance and, you know, uh, fairness and,
Yeah.
checking for adverse impact, bias, and it's just like, so what are you doing? So you think this is all about the technology and the gee whiz factor of, what this stuff can do? Like, who's validating these claims that it could even do those things? And oh, by the way, what's the impact on the average, job candidate or employee when you, implement, uh, these AI powered, solutions, and in the process outsource decision making to technology? I mean, these are supposed to be decision support systems, not decision making systems. But I continue to be critical of, especially across the HR technology and talent technology landscape, um, just how few of the conversations are meaningful and um, strategic, as opposed to tactical. Look at this new feature. Look at this new, bell or whistle. Instead of looking at the societal, implications, the leaning into the human centricity factor of all that has made transformations over the years successful in the first place, that go back to behavior change, communications, trust, right? It's not about the technology.
No, as I say in one of my pithier remarks is the easy to cut a check for the tech. It's a lot less difficult to get it to work. It's interesting you talk about responsible AI and the marketing guys getting hold of it. I actually think it's a crock of bullshit, for two reasons. One reason it's a crock of bullshit is I worked in sustainability, the sort of human side of sustainability, for about a decade. I had a consultant, but back in the 2000s, you did a bunch of sustainability work. And the thing in the 2000s was into the 2010s was greenwashing, right? So you stand up this very noble set of principles, usually divorced from metrics. That's not true for everyone. All companies pretty good about metrics, but usually divorced from any kind of commercial teeth that would, have the business engage with it. And my buddy was a head of sustainability for British Airways, and he went to visit Nigeria. I thought was interesting. He said, "Oh, here's my report, and these emissions, and blah blah blah." He got thrown out of the guy's office. So whatever they say in the London head office of British Airways about how important sustainability is to our mission, at the same time they had lawyers going to Brussels campaigning for less restrictive laws on airline emissions. So I think w- we worry that, and then this has been around for the 5 or 6 years I've been playing around with the AI space is that we'll just call something trustworthy AI, which is an IBM one, or responsible AI, or we'll call our AI human centered AI. And, sort of, that's that taken care of. And the other thing about responsible AI is I stood up, you and I know you're an ethicist also, could make a long list of the 30 to 50 difficult ethical issues surrounding AI. They're not all of the same magnitude, but there are quite a few of them. Responsible AI significantly doesn't have anything on the environment or anything on the economy and jobs. I find that an absolutely grotesque mission. It's like if you think about business as people, profit, planet, they're like people and planet, whatever to that. So I find it like my days of sustainability, wholly insufficient rigor and thought goes into it, and then under adopted. So even if it were 80% good enough or 75% good enough, it's still um, masquerading as a policy if you want. What's your take on responsible AI? The gap between, if you will, the words and the action.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate what you're saying about missing the sort of environmental, um, global impacts of some of the things that we're doing. I mean, there's no responsible AI framework that I've seen. It may exist, but there's no one that I've seen where it takes into account, um, some of the factors, I guess, akin to that greenwashing that you were talking about, Paul.
Mm.
Um, and so I think it's probably another slice of the responsible AI pie that's missing. Um, I do think it's there's a lot of factors that people need to think about as they think about their use of AI. I don't know that they all should necessarily sit on an individual's plate, but organizationally, if you think about the responsible AI framework that you're adopting and that you're touting, to your point, um, that you should think carefully about what's included in the scope of your responsible AI, policies, so that individuals can understand how that can apply to them. That it's not just adverse impact about future employees, and it's not just adverse impact um, for your stakeholders across your particular ecosystem, but we live in a globalized environment where everything affects everything else, and so um, if you're human centric, for example, how can you not care about what's going on in local communities and um, their issues with data centers and the health impacts that those may have, or the power consumption that they may take on. I mean, there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that people don't even realize. But to get a faster to get a faster model costs you what exactly, right? Like people don't necessarily think about that. Like in order for you to generate your little AI, movie or graphic, what is the ultimate cost of that? And I don't think people are incentivized necessarily to care about some of those things because they just care about tactics. Care about they just don't have necessarily long term thinking about some of those impacts.
No, this is a problem that pre-existed long before AI, and maybe like all things, AI is holding up a great big spotlight or magnifying glass, whichever metaphor you choose to to it. Um, I don't. I'm one of these people that's completely AI pilled, like completely drowning in agents doing stuff all the time. 3 or 4 different agent setups, Hermes Codex, Claude Code, Claude Cowork, Communicate 2. I even dabble in some of the other Chinese models, like whatever. I got like tons of this stuff running some of it while we're speaking, right? It's doing stuff. Uh, and I'm not incentivized at all to think about whether um, the effect of that on the environment. It's that old saying like all the starfish scattered on the beach, and a dad picks down and picks one up, throws it back in the water, and the son says, Why'd you do that, Dad? There's thousands of them. What difference is that going to make?" He said, "I made a difference to that one." And it's like thinking about the lack of human agency, our lack of ability to make a difference. So why should I recycle? Why should I choose a car that's more efficient gas mileage? Why should I do any of these things when the problem is at the scale of billions? And who am I in Poughkeepsie, New York, or wherever you are? You're not in Poughkeepsie. But how are my pro climate behaviors going to uh, arrest this problem at the scale at which it manifests? So it's an old problem. Again, AI, that AI
It,
magnifies.
it
Um,
is. But Paul, and one of the things that's interesting about what you said, just in terms of AI, like the problems that AI is causing, is when we think about our own biases, either as individuals or just in general human biases. I mean, one of the things that AI is doing, in generally, not just like for the environment and some of these bigger, issues under what probably should be part of the responsible AI, umbrella. To your point, is AI is exposing all these biases, and then we're getting mad that we have these biases now exposed, or we're getting mad and we're blaming the AI for having the bias, when in fact all it's
mhm.
doing it's presenting, it's basically a mirror about how we've been making decisions forever, right? That's what it's learning from, and that's why it's exhibiting that bias, and it's hard for people to grapple with that and then accept that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I interact with it all the time. I find it much more bias free, much more evidence based, much more rational than dealing with humans. But there's no question that um, we're still working. It's being trained on human data and human data. There's boardrooms full of white guys. You know, 12 white guys sitting around a board table, the Trump cabinet, for example.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
at one time, I think he's taking,
Yeah.
or a bunch of brown workers picking vegetables in the field. Like it's trained on the that is from human society. Like, and it's easy to confuse. Like when it trains on that data, is like when does that turn into an art? And there was an interesting experiment with word association way back in the early days of AI, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when it was doing kind of some word association. So it has vectors in 1397 dimension space. I just can't imagine that. Can't even think in 3 dimensions, never mind 1300. But anyway, um, and the closeness of words, and you find that doctor, that nurse and female have a smaller cosine between the vectors, and doctor and male. So these associations that are descriptive, but they ought not to be prescriptive. A white male boardroom ought not to be a prescription, but it's unfortunately accurate description, at least on history, certainly 20, 30, 40 years ago. Uh, so yeah, some of that is baked in, but I do find it properly brief. Like I've told it, like, I don't need you to agree with me, friend, I need you to blow smoke up my ass to tell me how clever I am. I need you, I need you to push back. There are specific skills
Right.
called grill me. Is like if I come up with an idea to do something, I want you to say, "Stop. Have you thought this through? What about? What about? What about? What about this? What about that?" And you can, in a sense, I've also been very heavy-handed in curating sources. Like I don't want to see any bullshit from Twitter or Reddit or any of that stuff. Economist, Financial Times, some European newspapers, Al Jazeera, whatever. Like, give me a broad but sort of largely um, the quality end of the internet rather than the BuzzFeed, Buzz BuzzFeed and whatever those such. I don't know what you thought. That was a very
Yeah.
long ramble for me. I apologize, but
No. Well, I think, one of the things that you're bringing up in my mind was around, like, influence and online influence and the weight that that carries as it feeds into some of these models, the training set, right? And how does it know who whose voice should carry more weight either by brand, to your point on some of those media outlets, or by individual, journalists. How much weight do these carry, and what does that mean in terms of its AI output and how these different models might be trained? Everyone. I don't know. I feel like I'm in an echo chamber already where people are all sort of listening to the same loud, prominent voices online when it comes to AI literacy and fluency and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, and they're PhDs and they're professors and they're economists and things like that. Um, but I just don't know how some of these models are weighing some of that evidence, effectively. I'm not a researcher in that way, so I don't know how it's all working out, but it's all winds up influencing, how we think about some of these bigger issues, just like at the advent of social media when everyone was like, "Oh, look at this person has all these followers, they must really know their stuff." And nowadays, I don't think we make that assessment.
that's an inverse
Nowadays, we
correlation.
say this
Often an
this
inverse
guy must be
correlation.
using AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now this guy must have a good, AI routine, that he's using to do all this, outreach and post every 5 minutes. Um, and that's how he gained all the followers or whatever. So it's like this it's very, it's like an obstacle course that people have to navigate.
It is. What's your what do you use in you're more cautious on what are you using in your daily work? What sort of work do you have agents doing for you, day to day?
Yeah. So I've got sort of a mini fleet of, I don't know if I'd call them agents. They're more like automation routines, I guess.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's, effectively acting like, yeah, it's like, um, anytime I get a cold pitch for someone to be a guest on my podcast, I have a vetting, rubric and research that's done and drafted responses for each of those. It's making sure I didn't lose track of people I've invited on the show, doing guest research. So anytime somebody books a prep call for a podcast, I have a research dossier built. That's through this is all through Cloud Code. So I have research dossiers built, and then once the prep call occurs, it goes into my email, finds the Gemini transcript, and builds out a discussion outline, summarized version, and a detailed version so that I'm fully prepped for both the prep call and for the recording with the guests. And then I have other agents that do sort of post recording, um, things like the show notes for the episode, social draft of social posts, um, anything that doesn't need to be. I don't have it doing anything that should be in my voice, although it is referring to my sort of writing style skill before it drafts, an email to anybody. It doesn't send any emails. Nothing goes out written by AI from under my email account. So it's mostly like research, triage, and then I've got a morning brief that gets reduced that looks out across all outbound and inbound things to make sure I don't drop any balls, make sure I don't miss out on any client requests, any prospects that come in that are qualified. Um, so it's basically like my own, I guess, virtual assistant in a lot of ways.
chief of staff is what people are calling it these days. I don't know if it kind of lives up to the Pepper Potts standard. Hip Pot's the greatest chief
Not
of
yet.
staff ever. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah,
have similar stuff, and
it's not there yet, but
no, I suffer from you know, focus, distraction. Everybody does a little bit. I think I probably do a lot, and so I find that morning chief of staff week thing. They're like, "You've got 3 meetings coming up. Here's 2 paragraphs on this person that you're meeting." Or if I have a big meeting coming up, as I do at the end of this week, I want to know everything about the organization and this person and their history and what they've posted and everything like that. So I pitch up for things like way more prepared. So it's increased the sort of quality of my preparation a lot. By the way,
yeah.
I noticed there are people who prepare for podcasts and people who don't, because I do slightly fewer now, but certainly was doing one a week for a while. And there are people who get your name from somebody, get you on the phone and say, "Well, tell me about you," and then they go from there. And then there are people who are the very best of them, like Dwarkesh, for example. There's one guy who Lex Friedman, who I don't particularly like his politics and his guest selection or something like that, but boy, is he well prepared. So I think there's a vast difference. I've never really listened to Joe Rogan because, again, I don't really align with his views on things or something like that. But when I have, this guy's like really prepared, like no
Yeah.
screwing around. Yeah. So I admire that. I admire that,
Yeah.
and that's something that's just so ripe for automation too, because it makes mincemeat of their thousands of posts in their bio and their company. Just chops that up and very useful.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't it didn't happen overnight. I mean, there's been a ton of, tweaking, and in fact, with some of these routines, you could argue well, I'll say this, it's definitely saved more money, excuse me, saved more time than it's wasted time, but I have done a lot of, rework and tweaking of some of these routines that are running because I think it miscalibrated something or it summarized something that should have given me all the detail because now it's been a couple weeks since I responded to an inbound pitch or whatever. I mean, everybody should get, unless it's completely out of left field or unjustified, everyone should get a response, which is the same way I feel about job candidates. Everyone should get a response. No one should be
Yeah,
completely
that's not
ghosted
by
if they
any
took the
means the
time to.
standard. Yeah, that's not the standard in jobs.
Yeah.
So that's my standard too. Is everybody gets a courtesy one liner, and I do let the AI send those. If it's a sales outreach, I say thanks, but no
Okay.
thanks. You know, whatever. I don't let it
Yep.
do anything. I don't
That's
let it
fair.
do it. I do let it delete anything that looks like spam or marketing. I just said just delete all shit. I just don't. I get 400 emails a day. And then I also get so many newsletters because the newsletters like the shiny thing are like, oh, they look interesting. Oh, they look interesting. And I can listen to that one. And I should listen to this podcast. So, over 20 years, that's become hundreds of newsletters. And I also say, I just want to know the 3 I should
Yeah.
look at today. And I don't want anything, like delete the rest. You know
Yes.
what I
That
mean?
is probably my next routine. Yeah. I gotta, because every Substack, I'm getting an email from every comment, um, every note, every update, video, text, everything is coming into my inbox, and I don't need it, but I also have, I don't know, I wanted my chief of staff to consolidate all of that into one place, and my email inbox is not the place.
no,
So, I need something.
I was a knowledge worker for the last 35 years. The first thing, before I started thinking more consciously about how I spent my day, it's like the first thing you do is you open up your inbox, and there goes 90 minutes. When at the time of day when
Yeah,
you ought to be at your most creative, working on the big rocks to try and get ahead of the week. Not leaving the big thing you have to do till Thursday afternoon, but starting at Monday morning rather than
yeah,
spending 90 minutes with your inbox. Scheduling is another thing. That's a complete 2 or 3 people meetings, and one can't do this and one can't do that time, and then you've got the meeting scheduled finally, which used to take weeks. If you work for a big company, sometimes even just the scheduling stuff can take a week, and then someone decides they have to reschedule, and then you got to go through the whole. So I have it doing all that because I just
yeah.
those are the sorts of things that are just so annoying. So I do the news summary in the morning from my curated sources. I do my calendar prep, like to make sure I don't show up, so to speak. This isn't too vulgar, I hope, with my pants around my ankles, for a meeting. I have it handle the um, emails, and I've taught it to write in my voice. I've said, yeah, don't be so formal. Like, um,
Yeah.
so anyway, we're all learning. I mean, this co-work stuff is only 6 months old, right? If you were,
Yeah.
if you were
Yeah.
the,
Well,
the, very, the
some
very
of these I had
frontier,
started. Yeah, as soon as Cowork was available for Windows,
yeah,
I jumped in and I created some of these routines in
February, yeah,
Cowork because I said, okay, you don't need to go for most of this. You don't have to go to the internet at all. You've got my Gmail, you've got my Google Calendar, um, and you've got Google Drive and a couple other a Notion and a couple other non-Google things, right? That's why I
yeah.
didn't create Google, Gems or whatever in Gemini. But I also wasn't sure I was ready at the time to go into code. I also thought that might be over engineering some of this. But as I started to learn more about what code was going to do for me and the fact that my laptop would have to be basically always on in order to execute some of these routines. If I wanted to be able to publish things to a web page and connect a few more tools, and have some of these routines feed into that morning brief, so that I've got summarized, sort of sections, including news. To your point, then I needed to do something a little bit more complicated. So I started getting more comfortable with Claude Code, and I moved everything out of Cowork into Claude Code, and now I've got sort of a almost using the morning brief almost like as a supervisory kind of agent, and then these routines I treat as almost like sub agents going out. But it gets complicated because then you've got to remember you can't have a conversation thread within a particular routine because it's not going to be automatically picked up, elsewhere or whatever. So it's like managing a team of people, right? You've got to understand who did I tell what instead of just having your team lead, orchestrate on your behalf and delegate to the team lead. So everybody's a builder now and everybody's a manager now, whether you like it.
Yeah, but human beings have never been very good at delegation. I mean, there's a tax if you were doing the very sophisticated time management stuff of getting things done, like all those years ago when that was a big fad, and like everybody was
Yeah.
getting things done by David Allen. And so one of the things is like you delegate tasks to people, and then you say, okay, can I have it by Tuesday? But if you don't have a good system, then Thursday rolls around. Do it. You have to remember you're the glue that's holding that together, and so that kind of keeping people accountable is which serves them as well as serves you. It's not like being an asshole about it, but it serves them and serves you, but it
Yeah.
certainly removes that memory tax about who did I who did I give that to, or did they send it to me? All of those kind of things. That's why I love the second brain stuff. I mean, you use Notion, I use Obsidian. I mean, I'm makes you my life and my projects and my to-do lists and my calendar and my research, like everything was on Obsidian now. And what's great is that all the different agents I use can query it. So Codex can query it, and Code can query it, Cowork can query it, Teamy can query it, Hermes can query it. They have this source of truth. I hate that word, but there you go. Which all of my agents can query. So they were all using those stupid metaphors, singing from the same hymn sheet, if you will.
Yeah.
So I mean, I did some research on this, by the way. I mean, there are 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion AI users on the planet. It's kind of hard to get your arms around it as well. But of the people who are using it in the way that you've just described that you're using it, there are probably only 100,000, 200,000 people. I mean, I have some sort of more precise guesstimates in my research. It's a very small subset of people. And if I start, we have to be conscious of that. We talk about AI because if we talk about even at the level that you talked about it there, you and I aren't as sophisticated as the super crazy people who have six Claude Code terminals on, like built-in agent swarms, and there's levels to the shit. But we're in a very skinny level. But even when we talk about what we're doing here, a lot of people think those guys are just drunk AI. Two morons, or you know, yeah, we sound like
Yeah.
we sound like we're just sort of drunk or intoxicated or with this, this, you know, I don't think.
Well, I think, I think expertise, like like in any domain, I think expertise is sort of relative, right? And so, so yeah, I mean, you and I know a lot more, and we're a lot more comfortable than a lot of people, perhaps the majority. But I also we know enough to be dangerous, and we know enough that we know that every day there's tons of things to learn, to either do the things that we're doing better or to expand on what we're doing. I mean, and you'll make mistakes along the way. I made a lot of mistakes trying to build a second brain to even feed the chief of staff, right? Like I thought I could just just go in Notion and just figure stuff out. And I was like, no, how's it going to do that? It doesn't have any of the context. It doesn't have the
Yeah.
source of some of this stuff. And it's a mess. And like, you can't, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, I don't think my brain could handle that. Um, but it's got to be, it's got to have enough clues to be able to connect dots and say, what about this? What about this? Is this prospect related to that topic? Is it related to this or whatever? And so I I put too much. I tried to push too much on it at once, and thinking it was gonna just automatically understand the chaos, and that was, in hindsight, kind of silly.
Yeah. Context management is, it's kind of the whole ball game. I mean, there's more when we move from context engineering to harness engineering to loop engineering. Now there's even something called graph engineering. So, uh, pick your poison. I'm going to talk about those are new concepts for quite similar things that have, taken hold in the last. I think graph engineering might only be 3 weeks old as a concept. But context engineering is the one that I think is the biggest unlock for most people. Is if you wanted to do work specifically for you, and not an abstract word. You don't want the communications plan to be an abstract idea about how you do a communications plan. You can get that from Google and within the pictures. You want it to be this client, this
Yeah,
need, this context, this medium, and all of that kind of stuff to be of total use with you. I mean, even right now, I'm thinking about my trip to Europe. I'm thinking about, like I said, break down all the European cities I could live in for a month and, cost, walkability, I gave it some criteria, stuff like that. But the criteria I gave was very, very light. It can do a great job of that if it understands more about Paul and his values and preferences. It does a terrible job if it just produces a list of 40 European cities with a list of numbers for rents on the right hand side. So context is everything. I was asked to do a book review for 2 book reviews in the same week, a foreword for 2 books that are coming out, neither of which were on AI. Quite interesting. Um, and one was a 400-page book and one was a 200-page book. And I was in the car, my friend was driving, and I thought, how, 600 pages and do an incredible job of writing these reviews. So I said, Claude, can you give me a hand here? Where he says, well, I mean, Claude said, well, I've read everything you've ever written is sitting in Obsidian. As I know your voice is like, how about I ingest the manuscripts and produce a draft for you? And then I felt a little guilty about that. I thought, well, I'm having it right, because a foreword is quite an important introduction to a book. And I thought, how bad is it? And I did say to the people for whom I wrote the forwards, I was like, listen, you know, AI had the first crack at this. It's based around my thinking, my values, my philosophies, my frameworks, and everything that I've ever written. Uh, so it's definitely my voice. It's definitely my perspective and everything like that. But I felt I wouldn't do this always, but I said I felt obliged to say this is first draft of this was produced by AI because it's quite an intimate thing asking someone to write a foreword for your book. Right? It's like asking someone to
yeah,
midwife the birth of your child. I mean, it's not quite that, but it's like, anyway. So I found like having that context meant that I could give away 600 pages of reading. Might have been 10 days work to do a decent job on those 2 forwards, and I did it in the afternoon while I was in the car. Actually, I was using
yeah.
this thing called Dispatch on my phone. So I don't know, context.
Yeah, I think that if you, I like your point about transparency. First of all, I think that's important, especially when it comes to writing. You know exactly how you're using AI, and the overarching point, Paul, I think is important around that it wasn't just any AI, which then the author could have just done that themselves. It was a custom built, significantly trained and vetted, uh, sort of digital twin, if you will, version of you that thinks like you, writes like you, or whatever. And um,
Yeah.
so that is a good starting point as opposed to a generic model that just reviewed any book, which anyone could have done. So they came to you for a reason. You've applied at least some level of your thinking and effort that went into that, and then maybe you do a cursory review on top of that. I don't know, I haven't been asked to do that, so I don't know um, how
Well, it's only
obligated
three
you feel
pages. I did
read
a
all
very
600
thorough
pages
review. It's,
yourself.
I still don't like the way AI writes. It writes just very bloated and I don't like
Yeah,
it at all. I find myself
yeah.
also doing something I do
So
when I edit
one of
humans
the
is I end up deleting sentences, like delete, 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 delete. That's horrific. Anyway.
so so even though it doesn't, I wouldn't consider these like writing samples. When I respond, when it's drafting responses to even these cold outreach emails, I'll still just delete the draft because I'm like, you did not reference my writing style skill when you responded, and you're just not approaching this whole thing is not approached right. And by the way, you're vetting. I gave you specific criteria with which to vet these pitches, and a specific rubric. So why you took it upon yourself to make judgment calls beyond the rubric is just fascinating to me. Like, why when you just ask me about these things, say you're not comfortable scoring it until, like, it was stupid stuff like invalidating claims. Like, the person reached out to me, self-nominated to be a guest on my show, and they called themselves the founder and CTO, but it checked public sources and it said, you know, co-founder and CEO. Like, I think the
Yeah,
person
I got that
knows
one.
what their
I got
role
that one.
is.
It
They've been at
manufactured.
this company for 10 years. If their
Yeah,
role evolved, yeah, I mean, like,
it
what do you
manufactured
I
a
was like, "What
PhD.
the
It
hell do you think you're
manufactured a
doing?"
PhD for me once upon a time, which was a little annoying. Thank you but you're not a degree granting institution. It does.
Yeah, and so it's just stupid. I mean, this is yeah, this is stuff that needs to be babysit sometimes, but it's also why evaluations need to be, pretty thorough when you're building stuff, especially for other people, or, the AI is supposed to be you're trying to trust it to take on certain, responsibilities. The whole point is to get some of this stuff off our own, plates. And so, but I can't do that unless I trust that you're doing it the right way. So I just feel like Claude is a very mediocre intern right now.
Well, that's interesting. It's mediocre in some respects, though. I mean, having worked with lots of early career people, I like hiring people who are very early career, 22, 23, 24, hungry for learning, and they haven't built some of the bad organizational habits that people get later in their career. I Does that make more or fewer mistakes than a human? Because I always want to caution people who are the skeptics for saying, and this applies to the relationship space. We'll talk about that in a second, but it applies also to the workspace and the delegation stuff. Like wouldn't expect that much uh, in terms of accuracy, precision, attention to detail, quality from a 23-year-old who graduated from college 2 months ago. I think the difference is AI does it much faster, and it's easier to be lazy at the end. Like I do a lot of Claude code stuff, and it generates these things called pull requests, which are these big, multi-page long things in GitHub, which is this is what I did, and this is what I changed, and this is what the failure modes, and this is how I test it, and everything like that. But for a longest time, I'd just like click, okay, go ahead. I was like, and I've stopped doing that now. And I'm much more vigilant about reading through, even if it's some of it's kind of code and I don't understand everything that's going on, but making sure I understand that stuff. But it's easy to be lazy. It's easy to take that thing, which is probably 85% done and just push it out without, you know,
Yeah. I mean, it's doing some of the technical things very quickly and arguably effectively, but, like, it doesn't listen, first of all, which I would expect an intern to listen intently. It doesn't it takes action before asking a question, so it's basically, um, asking for forgiveness instead of permission,
yes, it
um,
does that
which
sometimes.
you know yeah. And then, and sometimes it's making up some of its own rules. It's ignoring certain rules just randomly. Um,
Are you finding that with the
yes, my
advanced
my
models?
rules say that I'm
I'm
supposed
sure
to
you're using
check this before that, and then it just doesn't.
you're using the best models, right? You're not talking about some kind of lightweight model like you're using like Sonnet or Soul or something like that, 4.8 or they,
No, no, this is like, you know, usually like Opus 4.8 or Opus
I
5,
mean,
something like that.
that I mean, it's one of the top five. Something that if it's a failure that Opus is jet making, then you can be sure that most of them are also making them. Yeah. And have you
Yeah,
tried? I'm
I
sure
I
you've
just
tried this.
surprised at some of the things I've had to go back and fix.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Can you modify your Claude.md to be more vigilant about some of these numerous failures? Because you've been very articulate in naming very specific failures. Is there a sort of master? Well, there is a master called Claude.md. Can you modify Claude.md so that it says these are the ways in which you're being a insert, uh, no swear word, uh, can you triple verify any output? I'm sure you've thought of this, right, or done it. Is it work or
Yeah. Yeah, I think where I have gone wrong is, like, I'll push back, like, in the moment, and then it'll tell me that it's gonna, record it somewhere, but it's just not in the right place. I think that's where I get tripped up, where I don't, and part of this, I don't know why Claude as a platform doesn't have, like, a visualization. But I know if you ask it for a visualization, like an architecture diagram, it'll create one. But why it didn't take some of the things that came from, like, make.com and N8N, just in terms of the wiring some of these things together and visualizing it. To me, I'm a visual person, so it would have been helpful to see exactly, like, what you're talking about, like, go back to the core skills that are supposed to, be relevant to everything underneath, like in my account, at an account level. These are all the things that you should be checking, because I think, where I was getting tripped up is I was just almost having a conversation thread in the wrong spot sometimes. And it was like, why do we keep patching this? In fact, just this morning, it said, just so you know, the skill file for one of your routines is now 10 times as big as it was originally,
what?
because of all the patches and fixes that we've done on top of it. So you may want to think about consolidating it. It's like, I got an idea. Why don't you consolidate it? Right? Like, why don't you tell me, why don't
Yeah,
you draft the proposed compression of that incorporates and doesn't lose anything. So I don't know. I just feel like I'm doing more. It should have enough context at this point. I'm still doing too much coaching, if that makes sense.
I agree. And when you get six or seven of them running and doing stuff, producing various things, which on some days I will, the thing that I find absolutely exhausting is being the glue, the guy at the end who makes sure all these bits live together. Like the verification tags is not the part of my work that I enjoy. Like I'm not that guy who you would never hire me to edit the final approval of a book. You wouldn't do that. I just don't have the faculties to do that. But yet with AI, I'm frequently at the front end with my creativity and imagination and whatever I don't want to say, whatever I have at the beginning that launches things that are supposed to be valuable in the world as well. Good at that part, and then it does the middle part, And then there's the end part, which I kind of suck at and I don't enjoy. And because I'm using so many agents, there's just a shit ton of it, like tons of it. And I do find that really tiring sometimes. I just think, oh my God, you know, like six different things and they're all blocked because I have to take some action and which one should I do
Yeah.
first? So I find that taxing. But I'm pushing my own limits as well. I mean, I do want to say, like, my exhilaration partly comes from the speed at which I'm learning. And that's the part that makes this time, 2026 particularly, because AI was pretty useless in 2025. I don't know whether you agree. I mean, that's kind of a broad statement. But for the mass of humanity, it wasn't a very useful tool in 2025. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I don't know if that's a controversial take or not, but it was kind of
I think it's gotten much more useful. I think we're starting to see some of the capabilities that I envisioned that we would have. We still have a ways to go. Um, I think sometimes I'm admittedly unrealistic about where I think we should be at this point, given the pace. We're now maybe 3 years in. We're now almost 4 years in
November 22.
to
No,
generative
coming
AI.
up for 4 flat years into generate to the generative AI world. Yeah.
4 years,
But I mean, I think the first three, it wasn't very
right?
useful.
So we've seen. I think it was very limited in its usefulness. I think it still has a ways to go in terms of helping orchestrate and manage all of this. I keep telling it, you need to be helping me think more strategically instead of tactically. And that's not just because one routine is feeding another or these three routines are feeding my morning brief or whatever. I mean, bigger picture, help help be a good chief of staff, not just you know, uh, a 22-year-old intern who's still trying to figure out, what all these things mean and where to find stuff and, what to prioritize over what. And so I still think there's a lot to be done there. I still think responsible AI has a lot more, maturation to come. And some of that is the oversight. I mean, Sam, I really like Sam's comment in here about the guardrails because those are some of the principles underlying everything that he said are some of these principles about accountability and being responsible and that we can't check our own work, right? We can't be our own auditors. Um, and so how do you do that in an agentic world? And responsible AI has not kept up by any stretch. And now that we're into this agentic environment, agent to agent communications, your digital twin talking to my digital twin. What is reality at this point? And who's checking what, and what is the oversight sort of structure that organizations need to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. That we're all being as responsible by design as we can be as we're building things and using things, and um, and how do we do these things at scale um, and consistently within an organization so that your stakeholders are all getting the same answer no matter who they ask a question to.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. You and I are talking about the challenges of we essentially just, I don't know if you have human people working for you. I don't. Um, But when I do begin to introduce other humans into my team, like I had my son come and do his college grad, do some stuff for me as well. That added a whole nother level because now I've got two humans, one of whom is very inexperienced in agents. I'm trying to link him up to this system because it's not just me working anymore. It's me and this network of brains. It's how do I plug in my young son into that network of brains? But if you multiply that by a team or by an organization, all of the problems that we are talking about don't disappear. They become considerably worse, considerably worse. I mean, even data sources is something that is, for me, when I began to try and, because if AI looks at shitty data, it gives you shitty results. So I had to corral all of my PowerPoints and all my videos and all the proposals I've written and all the documents and all the white papers I've written. And they're not just in one place. They're in Box and they're in Dropbox and they're in OneDrive and they're in my Google Drive and they're in Claude Chat and they're in Obsidian. And so I've got this kind of nightmare of stuff of like, which of these is canonical, which of them is relevant? That's another thing. Like, it's not all equally valuable. I would like to think it was all, you know, Dante like prose, but it isn't. So I found even at a micro scale, like trying to fully automate the bottom of my business was incredibly difficult and challenges that I couldn't imagine that I would have had. And it shines a light on how disorganized like all of that stuff was. Like 35 years of consulting. And by the way, we nearly were colleagues at IBM. I worked for someone called
Yeah,
Wright.
I
I
saw that.
don't know if was Amy Wright around when you were
Um,
at the firm?
Amy Ray, who was running GBS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who she is. I never met her. I don't yeah.
She's a good boss, good leader. Um, One thing that's interesting, though, in this kind of comparing the human intern with the AI interns and how erratic you're finding the performance of some of your agents, it's like having an intern that's, maybe not super competent or very error prone, that produces huge volumes of work, but is still error prone. I think that a lot of the skeptics I hear pro when they talk about AI and relationships, for example, and they hold up an ideal of a human relationship. So there are a lot of people on Substack, uh, in fact, almost all women, who have intimate companionship with an AI. Now, I don't particularly have a dog in a hunt, and it's a lonely world, and people talk about an epidemic of loneliness and Robert Putnam and Bowling Alone. I mean, there's lots written about that. And my point of view is like, have at it if it brings you joy. Some people find that creepy. But one of the things people say is like, oh, it's this, and it can't do that, that, and that. But they're holding up a template of human relationship, which is loving, caring, supportive, companionate, and intimate. You hold that up as a template, well, yes, it's going to fall short. But are human relationships like that? No, they're not. Right? They're abusive, they're
Yeah,
toxic, they're violent, whatever. So let's be careful, I think, uh, about what we're
yeah,
comparing. It's an awfully long way from ideal. And perhaps this is where the rhetoric from Silicon Valley kicks itself in its own ass, because it's setting up this utopian world, which is certainly not where we are today. And we're certainly not going to be there very soon. And so people are comparing what AI is currently capable of with this utopian fantasy that will automate all the drudgery in our lives. And they're really just not doing that yet. So they maybe through their utopian painting of the potential of the technology have shone a light on the ways in which it now fails. I could be wrong. That might be wrong. But I don't know what you think about that. The-
yeah. No, I think you're right, Paul. I mean, the human and AI relationship is really complex. I don't even like
Mm,
when people call AI a tool. It is way more than a tool.
way
I mean,
more than that.
even if you just call it a technology, it's an entire tool kit. It's a workshop. It's so much more than an individual tool. And I think we've got to get more people exposed to the fact that it is not just the new Google. It is not just your shiny new hammer. Um, Not every problem is a nail, and I totally appreciate that sometimes I want it to be more robotic. I mean, Sam, I appreciate Sam's comment again here about the consistency of results. Sometimes I do want it to be more robotic, and so to try to anthropomorphize it into an intern just to give it some sense of humanity and other, give it human traits is almost doing it a disservice sometimes. So I don't expect it. I shouldn't perhaps expect it to understand all the nuances and when do you want me to be more human and when do you want me to be more, robotic. I want my results consistent. I want my vetting of potential guests to be consistent. There are certain things that need to be consistent, and there's certain things that when you have context and you have, human judgment or whatever, have more sensitivity and variability. So this isn't this isn't an easy nut to crack by any stretch, and I don't want to imply that it is. I'll probably continue to, argue with Claude about all kinds of random shit, right? But
I love it. I love
if I'm going
arguing
to
with it. I
trust
love arguing with it.
you I'm gonna trust I'm going to trust it. Like, I need you to understand that going off path, when we just spent all this time collaborating on the rules, and then you turn around the next morning and break the rules. Well, what the fuck have we been talking about this whole time? Right? Like, why didn't that stick? Right? So it's just, and you and I have the patience and the time, and it's core to what we're doing. And so when we think we've got to be think about the average person who's just trying to get through the day and has, 40 hours of stuff to do a week, and where do they fit all this in? And they're just waiting for us to figure all this stuff out so that they get the easy button after we've been toiling in this muck for 4+ years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is early. I think I don't want to set myself as AI. It is early days for agentic AI. Like it was sort of around in 2025, but you had to be a coder. And Cowork really OpenClaw. It's February, so we're now 6 months deep into having these tools which can do useful work for you. And it's like having a new puppy. Like there's shit all over the carpet from time to time. I think what's interesting about talking to you that I really enjoy is you're um, more critical and more cautious than I am. And often there are people who I find who are super cautious, super critical, are really ignorant. But you are deep, deep into it. Like the stuff you're doing is, plus or minus about the same sort of stuff as I'm doing. So you're very deep into using it. One of the 100,000, 200,000 people who are doing the sorts of stuff that you described, but you're also like super cautious, like this thing is, well, a mess. I like that stance. I think that's a stance that's probably very useful to organizations too. Like you both see the potential, but you're also not blind to the nonsense that goes on around it. So that must be very useful. Is that most of your work is consulting these days? Mostly
Um,
organizational consulting,
yeah, I
or
mean,
working
it's
with individual leaders, or what's your offer, as they say these days?
yeah, I mean, ideally, I'm helping either individuals or to help themselves, get out of their own way, founders and other leaders, or it's working with people that know they need to start to adopt these things. They know they need to change some of the ways they operate, and they're just not sure how or where or how. Excuse me, how or where or
Sure.
where to start.
Where to start? Yeah.
And so part of that, when I think about, AI readiness and this concept of AIQ, is like, what is your starting point? How comfortable are you interacting with some of these tools? I want to get everyone sort of one step in the maturity scale forward, right? Start there, start with some baby steps, pick one area where, you're experiencing the most, challenge. I mean, I could technically help leaders at enterprises, but I feel like I'll leave that to some of the bigger, outfits that can go in with, structured programs and stuff like that. For me, it's more, how do I make sure that people don't feel like they're being a victim, that they're being left behind? Non-technical people that really can start to make, effective use of some of these tools, whether it's taking some things off their plate or, using AI as a thought partner, um, building a chief of staff, building, second brain kinds of tools, because I think there's a lot of people, even in my inner circle, friends, relatives, entrepreneurs who are trying to run a business, right? And they don't have the time to sort of dig in deep enough to this, but everybody's got a little time they can carve out, and I just want people to use that time effectively, learn from my and others' mistakes where they hit dead ends or they approach something, the wrong way, and what can you learn from that? So for me, I would love to just coach and advise, people who are trying to get out of their own way, or people whose teams need to hear, the message and need to hear the conversation that we just had, Paul, and get their people to really think differently about how AI can augment rather than replace, the work that we're doing. But that's going to be uncomfortable for some people. It's going to be, you're going to feel like you're losing some of your identity. This is what the way you've always worked and things like that. But you have to be able to adapt. I mean, that's one of the key skills um, for for the future, current and future workforce. Is you got to be able to adapt and be willing to disrupt some of the things that you're accustomed to doing, recognizing that it's for the betterment of your own professional development as well as for the organization. So I just want I just want some of these messages to sink in and people to say, Bob, how can you help me get started? If that's individual coaching or come talk to my team or what have you,
Right.
then I'm open to those
I
opportunities.
think you'd be super. I mean, super good. I mean, just from that 1 hour with you, I've tried to stand up a 5 hour course on Maven and run one cohort. It turns out to be quite difficult to have people build things in groups. Like, I don't feel like this was a pilot. I don't feel like I cracked it. Like with one to one, I can sit behind the guy and like the laptop's open and I can see which buttons they're popping, and 90 minutes they can stand up something. You can wire up code work with Obsidian or something like that, probably in 90 minutes, and they'll have some sort of prototype chief of staff thingy done in 90 minutes. It turns out being harder in groups. I like doing the coaching stuff. It's very hard to scale though. That's the thing. Like, even if you're charging a lot of money, um, how many clients are you know, can you have in a week? Because you, and I don't know many people that I would say this, but you, it seems to me, would be really well equipped to coach senior leaders. And let me show you two, three things that you can do that will save you 5 hours a week. Like, you'd be awesome at that. But in groups, it's more challenging. So that's one thing I'm trying to do on Maven is set up a
Yeah.
small group. Let me build you a chief of staff. And I would say, honestly, full disclosure, I think I'm still learning to do it well at that scale. I'm also thinking about senior executive coaching
Yeah.
as maybe something that you do or want to do, as well as charging someone $10,000 or $15,000 for a 3 month. Not only will I inform you, but I'll also help you build and automate with it. It's sort of an AI leadership coach. I mean, you'd be, I think, uniquely well placed to do something like that. But um, it's early days.
Yeah, no, I appreciate I appreciate the vote of confidence, Paul. Yeah, I think that's the kind of work that I would really enjoy as long as I know that they're gonna, sort of pass it along and share, what's helping them with others because I don't think this is knowledge that should be hoarded. I think we need to share these learnings with each other. And so that's the power of community in a lot of cases. What I've seen fall short with some of the whether it's Maven or some of these other communities is people aren't they're never on the same path. They're never even in the same stage. So I've joined
Yeah,
calls where it should be a fairly entry level,
yeah,
one-on-one kind of course where I'm really just curious if anything I'm missing or I want to
yeah,
see the questions that people are asking because you
yeah,
got to ask better questions. You can't just try to absorb this through a lecture or anything like that. And
yeah,
so what I find is like there's a lot of people who are serious like experts who are in these courses and it's just like this hodgepodge of people at all phases of AI, readiness, AI fluency, and it's just like, what? Why are we even in the same class? I mean,
yeah.
this is like we're all in the little red
You just
schoolhouse,
you just described
all
my my
assumed to
my
be
my Maven.
be part of.
Yeah, yeah. You just described my Maven experience. What
Yeah,
I thought was very, very basic, and there were people in the course who were sort of trainee instructors interning with me. What I thought was very, very basic was absolutely bewildering for the true senior leaders in there who are nowhere near. And I thought it was very basic. So that difference
yeah.
of skills, ability, passion, trust, whatever you want to call it, like, that is a big, big deal for groups.
Yeah, and there's no standardization as far as someone's, readiness or fluency or whatever, and so every course, I mean, every Maven instructor may give even if they provided that, they may have a different scale, but we need to at least be in the same ballpark, like, okay, these people are in elementary school, these people are in middle school, and these people are in high school, and these other people are in college or what. Like, give me some buckets along a maturity scale, maybe a 3 to 5 phase maturity scale, so that we're all asking similar questions. I mean, you get into these Q&A sessions, and people are asking these like over the top, esoteric,
Right.
questions about why Langfuse didn't talk to, you know, GitHub and da da da, and these people are like, "What are you
What are
talking
you
about?"
what are
It's
you
like not
talking about,
even
bro?
English.
English? Yeah, I know. I have built, by the way, some super lightweight
Yeah,
diagnostics. By the way, they're on. I put them on my website there. Like, and do like how can people quickly assess where they are against on a 5 point scale along 7 different dimensions of, people call it literacy. I hate that word because it sounds like conceptual knowledge. It's not. The conceptual knowledge is booty price. So I do have a diagnostic that will kind of do that. It takes 5 minutes to fill out. So I do have some of that stuff. One of the challenges that I'm finding in this world is, like you, like me, I've come from a services world. Like, I've never built or sold a product in my life. Everything is customized for every single client. It's a different program every time.
yeah.
And I've always sold services. And I'm trying to think about how you do products, you know, because services, I always have to be there. And I'm at the age where I'm thinking about how do I build a business where I don't always have to be there for every single client deliverable. Without, by the way, I don't want to build another 50 person. I built a 50 person consulting firm. Never want to do that again. Not at my age, right? I want to build an ecosystem around me, which is delivering kind of some what I call adoption sprints. We work with a small team as a kind of change leadership, trust, enablement, education guy, doing all the human side of it, alongside maybe a forward deployed engineer and some domain experts in a little pod. I think shows that tends to work best rather than big bang. So how do I build an ecosystem that will develop that, and the coaching business and the CAIO advisory type stuff? So I don't think like a product manager. I know you have some PM expertise. Like, do, do you sell any products, or is it still are you still in the services world?
Yeah, I think you and I are in the same boat in a lot of respects, Paul. I have done the all the product work I've done is sort of in the rearview mirror, and it was always internal products, whether I was at IBM or NBC. It was always some type of internal. I mean, the concepts were all the same, right? This is what we're trying to build. These are the business, requirements. Here's some specs or whatever. We got to, translate that into technical requirements and whatever through that old software development lifecycle, process, which sort of no longer exists in a way. Um, but yeah, I mean, some of the fundamental, concepts I certainly understand, and some of the precursors to building the right things, right, with design thinking exercises and journey mapping, empathy mapping, and some of those things I've done a lot of that in the past. But you're right. I mean, similarly, I'm not going to continue to trade, my time for money for everything that I do. That's always going to be a part of it, especially if you're going to do one-on-one coaching. But I want to build some things that can scale, while I sleep, um, and be able to monetize, while I sleep, and whether that's extensions of coaching where someone's got me on retainer, and if you need me at 3 in the morning, you've got my digital twin, but do not call me. Um, and then, what are some of the things that I've learned that I can build that are not just, automation routines and stuff for my own benefit, but yeah, how much of this can I, collapse and package for other people so that I can, take a group of leaders either at a specific company or people who are in one of those same, we're in AI middle school. Let's go and attack this problem together, and we can learn from each other along the way. Because I have seen that be effective, but they've got to be approximately at the same comfort level. Otherwise, people get too far ahead and too far behind of each other, and then they get discouraged and what have you. You got to have everybody sort of helping move in a similar direction. I'm looking to go from 1x to 5x. If someone else is already at 20x in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, um, those cogs aren't going to be part of the same machine.
Yeah. Well, I want to get up from 0.25x in terms of efficiency to 0.8x in terms of efficiency. I've opened the floor for questions. I should have done that a bit earlier. Is anyone? We're at 75 minutes, so we should probably think about wrapping up and getting on with our days. But does anyone have any questions for myself or for Bob?
Just looking back at the comments, someone had a comment. Um,
Lots of my
I think this got answered before me.
Sam, you seem pretty on the ball. You still here? If you want to make a comment rather than a question, I think that'd be useful for everybody. If not, if not, thank you, everybody. Please follow Bob. Please follow me or follow or subscribe or whatever the thing is. I have Paul Gibbons Advisories, my website, and there are both products and services on there. Well, I have to admit, I'm a little lighter on the product side than I am on the services side. I'm trying to fix that. Bob, what's your website that people can track you down on?
You can go to you can put it in here. ElevateYourAIQ.com. And then the podcast. Um, well, I think you can get to the podcast from there. That's going to route you to cognitivepath.io, which is the advisory work. That's the LLC name, Cognitive Path. So those two are connected. But I'm also on the I'll just put it in my workdefined.com. That's the podcast network that I'm part of. Find my podcast.
That's great.
I think there was one question that came in from Fionawala. Is that how you say it?
Vanilla.
Which use cases get the biggest vanilla? Use cases do you get the biggest response to from senior execs? I mean, honestly, I think most of the time it's either related to how they can be the most effective, which turns back into what we've been talking about in terms of having an AI sort of chief of staff. If you're an executive at a big company, you may already have a real human chief of staff, but there's always room to sort of augment, some of the support in areas where maybe the human chief of staff isn't covering you. But I think some of that where they can try to essentially be in more than one place at a time. So maybe creating a digital twin for that executive is also an interesting use case. The other category of use cases for a senior exec is how do I do a more effective job being a leader when it comes to AI transformation? How can I start to frame this as what's in it for me, what's in it for my people, to overcome some of the fears that people have about their own training, their own digital replacement, and fear for their own job. It's in people's best interest to learn this AI capability. If the organization makes a decision that unfortunately impacts you, at least you'll be in a better position to have the transferable skills um, to find something else. But I think executives are either trying to for somewhat selfish reasons, but also, for them to be a more effective leader for their people. How do I do that with chiefs of staff and digital twins and those kinds of things? Or it's how can I make sure that I'm not a statistic when it comes to successful transformation, and how do I be a more effective leader with better communications, more empathy, and showing people exactly that we're all on this journey together and not punishing failure with AI or discouraging experimentation, but how do we lean into this so that the people become more effective, figure out new ways to use AI to work differently at an individual level and at an organizational level.
Jolly good, as we say in England. Good to have you. I have a podcast called Think Bigger, Think Better, and you have one called AIQ. So we should talk one day about what we do to some of that. But for now, thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paul.